Welcome back to CP Stated, the podcast where we explore the people, ideas, and innovations powering progress for individuals with disabilities and the organizations that support them. In this episode, CP State's own technology specialist Kelsey Massyk sits down with Adam Eads, Senior Program Manager at TechSoup, to talk about building digital resiliency in the nonprofit sector. From cybersecurity best practices to fostering a culture of tech literacy and acceptance, Adam shares practical strategies that help organizations stay secure, adaptable, and future ready. It's a timely conversation for any nonprofit leader looking to strengthen their digital foundation and empower their teams through technology.
So, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of CP Stated. My name is Kelsey. I work for CP State on the admin and the technical side of things, which actually brings me to this episode's topic, which is building nonprofit resilience in the digital age. The concept of digital resilience means being prepared and proactive in how an organization approaches technology. I also plan to touch on a program from TechSoup called the Digital Resiliency Program, as well as how nonprofits can approach strengthening their IT infrastructure while being realistic about the process, as well as why it's important to do so. And to help me with all of that, I've got Adam Eads here. He is the Senior Program Manager at TechSoup. So Adam, thanks for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. Would you mind doing a quick intro for yourself and what you do at TechSoup?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Kelsey. I appreciate it. So my name is Adam Eads. I'm a senior program manager at TechSoup. As you said, I work on the digital solutions and services team here at TechSoup. And the main focus of my work is around the program we'll talk about a little bit today, but the Digital Resilience Program, which is a kind of sort of medium term, 6 to 9 months generally, program where we work with small nonprofits to help them really accelerate their digital transformation process. So it's really about kind of finding them where they are and identifying, the kind of the biggest opportunities in front of them to make improvements, and then helping them to both with expertise and a small amount of funding, helping them to put those opportunities into place and get that digital transformation ball rolling for them.
Great. Awesome. Before we really jump into all of that, I know not everybody out there is like a TechSoup fangirl, as I call myself. I think I also used the term junkie the other day when we spoke. Would you mind just giving like a quick rundown on TechSoup, what it is to nonprofits for those who are uninitiated?
Sure. Yeah. So TechSoup we're a global nonprofit. We started in San Francisco. We're still headquartered in San Francisco. And we have, in different forms over the last 30, I think we're approaching 35 years here pretty soon. We're definitely over 30. Over that time, I've taken different forms of helping to open the doors of technology to the nonprofit sector. The form that I think most people are most familiar with is through our donations program, which has essentially unlocked or removed most of the financial barrier for many software, hardware, technology tools in general over the years. And that's taken many forms. There was a period in time where we had a warehouse full of floppy disks, and we used to mail those floppy disks to people way back in the olden times. That of course evolved to downloadable software packages with license keys, and that was sort of the access we were able to provide. And then now increasingly, and we've most people have moved most of their their software, their primary focus to away from software and into cloud-based services. So it's more of a subscription model, and so we've evolved our relationships with the companies we work with to facilitate those types of things as well. So that's, I think, the kind of core. It's really about access to the stuff. That's been our kind of core, our sort of bread and butter over the years. Increasingly over the last, I would say, 5-6 years, we're focusing not just on access to tools, but adoption of tools. And so we could tell you, how many people downloaded, I don't know, QuickBooks from us. What we couldn't tell you is how many people were struggling with using QuickBooks, or you can substitute QuickBooks for any other software package. And so more and more we're designing programs, and I think the digital resilience program is sort of part of this shift, to help organizations adopt the technology and use the technology more effectively. So one of the ways we do that is through our TechSoup courses program. We have a lot of on-demand courses in a variety of topics that are geared towards the nonprofit experience. So you can learn about the basics of Microsoft Excel, with there's of course a lot of ways you can learn about the basics of Microsoft Excel. Our courses will take a nonprofit approach to that. We also do instructor-led courses through that program. So I recently finished a course in cybersecurity, a 6-week course. We're going to run that again in the fall, so stay tuned. We'll be announcing that very soon. So that's one opportunity. We also, a couple of years ago, and are really starting to lean into this program, but launched a program called Quad, which is a paid membership that offers, in addition to deeper discounts on the things that TechSoup provides or offers, also offers access to a community of like-minded nonprofit professionals who are often struggling with similar problems, and a lot of additional access to TechSoup TechSoup experts and staff that sort of can sort of help people through some of those problems. We also do exclusive events, webinars and other things of that nature in that program. So you can go to quad.org and learn more about that program. But I think those are just some examples of how TechSoup is evolving from being kind of I think a lot of people thought of us as kind of the storefront for a long time, and what we're really trying to pivot into as being more of a facilitator in a more general sense for access to technology for the nonprofit sector.
That's awesome. Yeah, I do remember, when I first learned of TechSoup, years ago when I was just a little baby IT girl with an art degree. I, went to the website for one of our clients, and they were just saying, yeah, we get all our computers from TechSoup. And I was like, TechSoup, what is that? And it's really great to see how it's like grown from there, because, that opposite end of the physical product, great, they have it in their hands, but they don't know how to use it. They don't know how to use it efficiently. And, they get past that gate of, okay, we have the means to get this thing that we couldn't afford before, but now we need the means to hire a consultant to teach us how to use it. So
yeah,
that sounds like a
exactly.
really good resource.
Yeah, and I've worked for several other nonprofits in the past, and came across TechSoup in a similar way. Like, oh wow, this makes it amazing. The fact that we're able to save a bunch of money on this year's Microsoft licenses or whatever it is,
Yeah.
it makes a big difference to a lot of organizations. But as you say, I think a lot of people will get the thing and they'll try it out and not quite figure out how to use it, and don't really know where to turn to help with that. So that's really where we're starting to open up more opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of in the same vein, so the digital resiliency program kind of touches on that. Do you have what are the vulnerabilities, the digital risks that you think that IDD, or just to repeat it for you, the intellectual and developmental disabilities service providers, that they are especially prone to? I mean, we both know that healthcare providers in general are targeted pretty heavily with phishing and hacking attacks. We see it in the news all the time. So what is like the process? How are the vulnerabilities addressed? Those kind of things.
Yeah, I think in a general sense, I mean, I don't have a great deal of familiarity with the intellectual and developmental disabilities sector in particular. But speaking of the nonprofit sector in general, and more specifically, organizations that have some element of healthcare within their work, I can speak to that. So, specific to those, to organizations that are maintaining, records of medical records or health records, that falls under a category that I think most people would call very, very sensitive data. So, very often when we're working with organizations in the digital resilience program, for example, or even in this course we recently delivered, we'll ask organizations, tell us what kinds of sensitive data that you keep housed, somewhere within your organization. And very often we get the answer that we don't have any sensitive data. And we go, okay, good. Do you have donors? And they inevitably will say, yes, we have donors. Okay, do you have the donor's name and email address and maybe their mailing address where you send the thank you letter? Do you have any, God forbid, you have a credit card number on file that somebody could see? But that's sensitive information. Do you have clients? Inevitably, yes. Okay, well, tell me about those clients. Are they, who are they? Are they sensitive populations? Are they, immigrant populations or homeless or victims of domestic violence or people where their whereabouts or their personally identifiable information being exposed could be a could lead to real physical harm to an individual. So, health records kind of fall under that more sensitive category. So one of the things we really try to push is for all organizations is to recognize the a lot of organizations I think that nonprofits are not an attractive target because well we don't have a ton of money and are maybe they don't think of their data as being valuable to anyone else, right? It's valuable to the organization because they need it to do their work, but they don't think of it as being valuable to anyone else, but it certainly is.
Absolutely.
At the very least, they know it's valuable enough to you to maybe pay a ransom for it if there's a ransomware attack. But certainly, I mean, it's very there's a very sophisticated economy of data that is being used on the dark web and other places to use leverage information to harm people in other ways, access bank accounts, open lines of credit, all sorts of things. So we as organizations really need to think of ourselves as stewards of that data. And that becomes especially heightened when we're talking about things like health records. So again, not having familiarity, specifically in the IDD space, but I'm assuming that there are that nature of records that organizations would be keeping, and it's just it's of the utmost importance that they're really treating that data with the highest level of sensitivity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the first thing that came to my mind was probably, I imagine, social security numbers, but like, Medicaid numbers, those are,
Sure.
and the
Absolutely.
population obviously is more vulnerable as it is,
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but vulnerable populations are targeted. That's why they
Yeah.
elderly people a lot, and it's all awful. We have to guard
Yeah.
ourselves from that.
Right. Well, and it's a little bit of a self-perpetuating, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that, nonprofits don't really think of themselves as vulnerable, don't take appropriate action, and that's pretty well known now. So, the word is out. We're seen as sort of easy targets in a sense. So, you might, so I'll give you an example. I live in Oakland, California. We have a lot of car break-ins. You'll see broken windows like all the time. And so if you live here, just don't leave anything in your car, even like, a roll of quarters or, even something of low value. Um, and the reason is it costs somebody nothing to just smash your window and see if there's something in the glove box, right? So they might not make off with, $1 million, but maybe they make off with your, I don't know, like something that's worth a couple $100. That was a good score. That was a good score for them. So, and I think the other thing to bear in mind is that the ease with which these cyber attacks can be conducted is increasing exponentially. Part of this is AI, but part of it is just you can now purchase like hacker kits essentially where you don't have to be a highly skilled hacker to go conduct a cyber attack any longer. You can really just like sort of purchase these kits and sort of execute the attack and get the data that you're looking for, whatever it is you're trying to whatever malware you're trying to infect or whatever you're trying to do. It's the barrier to entry is very low now. So people don't have to go for the big score any longer for it to be worth the time. And so I think organizations really need to see themselves as very attractive targets and take action accordingly.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's like they're just kind of they're sort of spraying the whole field and just,
Yeah.
whatever hits, right?
Yep. Exactly.
And I mean, I'll be honest here. I'm a bit of a gossip. I like the tea. So can you give me like a real life example here of, a nonprofit, or I guess you could pretend it was a nonprofit and it wasn't, but they didn't make the move. They didn't update their either aging or inadequate infrastructure. And give me
Yeah.
the good story. What happened?
There was a good story. Well,
Bad.
I won't give any, I won't give any names, but
Yeah.
I mean, they're a lot. I mean, they're big and small. I mean, there's one example. I mean, there's one agency I remember speaking to recently, who had like a window. They had like a physical server in their office, which is something that, a lot of organizations don't have anymore. But it was something that they had for a long time. I think it was probably out of its useful life, and maybe was not able to run kind of the latest versions of the Windows Server software. And they just kept using it because it still worked. It continued
Mhm.
working. And then one day it didn't work anymore. And so the server crashed. They lost, a few weeks of client data. Had to kind of shut down operations for several days.
Mhm.
Um, and so, you could think of that as either a really major or a minor, kind of event. But certainly, if you're dealing with clients that sort of rely on you day to day, being out of business for a couple of days can really, cause hardship to the people that you're serving. And so, you need to think about, not just the potential loss of data or exposure of data, but like what would happen if we weren't, if there was a ransomware attack or some other thing happened that kind of, restricted our access to our systems. What would happen if we weren't able to work for one day, or
Mhm.
3 days, or for a week, or for a month, or for 3 months? What, like,
Yeah.
start to game out those scenarios, and you really start to see how important it is to take care of this stuff. So that's just a small example. I mean that, there are certainly, more catastrophic ones, but I think one thing I think about a lot, and we really try to push with organizations, is trying to understand their level of risk. Um, we all go around in the world, kind of doing risk assessment all the time, right? Like I said, I live in Oakland, California. I have locks on my door and I have cameras on my house, and I've assessed the risks that are around me, and I've taken actions to mitigate those risks, and I've also accepted that there is some risk. We're never going to get to 100% or 0% of risk, I should say.
Right.
There's always going to be some, and we can only take actions to, lower that probability. I think the problem is, in a digital space, the majority of people, we don't, if I send you an email, I write the message and I click send, and it goes from my outbox and instantaneously arrives in your inbox. And for most of us, we're not thinking at all about, like, data packets moving along fiber optic cables, or like what's happening in transit. It's almost like magic. You click the button, it arrives where it needs to go, and we move on. So I don't think most people are able to sensitize themselves to the risks that are out there in the way that we do, in our day-to-day lives. So a lot of what we try to do, within the course we led, and in the digital resilience program, is really try to help people start to sensitize them to that risk a little bit, so they feel it. I often tell people, I'm not trying to scare you, but I'm trying to scare you just a tiny bit, because
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that will spur people to take an action. If you don't really feel that, something bad can happen, somebody can tell you, yeah, I've got to, it's like going to your doctor and saying, they tell you, you've got to eat better, you got to get some exercise. If maybe you don't feel that bad, so you don't take that advice, but down the road, eventually that's likely to catch up with you. So it's a little bit the same. If we don't have a good understanding of it, it's hard to expect people to say, well, you got to change your password every 90 days, or whatever you've got to use a password with, um, 50 characters. It's
Yeah.
hard for people to understand why that's important
Mhm.
if they're not really kind of like, their eyes are not open to the risks, and how those things can help to mitigate them. So it just becomes a burden rather than, something that's empowering, that gives you agency over, managing that risk. So I think that's something that's important for people to start to kind of understand, and it helps drive people to taking, the types of making the types of behavior changes that are needed to kind of, improve their cybersecurity posture.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, I like your use of analogy. It's something I used to do to explain to people who are just, they're not super technically apt. I use a car analogy for everything. Everyone can relate to like, no, you see, your computer is like a Pinto and you're asking for it to do Ferrari things.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the thing I really admire about your position in particular, because I remember you mentioned to me that, you're not like a techie guy, by
No, not at
trade.
all.
You're like the translator in a way.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I don't have a technical. I mean, I have a long nonprofit background, and managing programs broadly in a lot of different contexts. I've kind of come to cybersecurity in particular over the last couple of years through delivering this program and just seeing the number of like relatively small, simple things that anybody can do, right? They're not out of, they're not really out of scope for the vast majority of people's technical capabilities. Um, that really, it's like this 80/20 rule where there's a few things you can do that will really bring down your risk quite a lot. Like for example, like something like the stat shifts a little bit, but it's always around 90%. Something like 90% of all data breaches start with an email.
Hmm.
So if you can have all the systems in the world and you can have a crack security team, monitoring you 24/7. If you know somebody in finance or whatever, that's not thinking of themselves as part of the what we call a human firewall,
Uh-huh.
and kind of doesn't isn't paying attention to the email and clicks on the sketchy link that executes malware on their computer, then it's game over. You might have the ability to kind of clean up that mess a little bit better with all of those systems, but the damage is done at that point. So, you know, um, I think it's kind of empowering to people to know that, like, oh, actually, I'm part of this solution. It's not somebody else's responsibility. Um, and like I have, it's funny you bring up car analogy. Anybody who listens to this, who hears me talk, will have heard this analogy. But like I often think about cars myself in this way, where I've been driving cars for 30 something years now. I've had many cars. I've had many problems with cars and taken to the mechanics. Other than the ability to change my oil, which I haven't done in 20 something years, I don't know anything about cars, and I don't really want to. I'm not trying to learn more about the car. The car to me is a tool to go where I need to go. And so if I have a problem, I want to take it to somebody. I want to tell them just enough information for them to fix it, pay my money, and I'll go back on my way and do what I want to do. And I think a lot of, not for everybody, but for a great number of nonprofit folks, technology is the tool that helps them do the thing they want to do, right? Whatever your mission is. And a lot of them are not trying to. I was probably this way until a few years ago myself, not really trying to learn the details a lot, really just want the tool to do what they need. So they need someone to help them figure out what's the right tool for us to do what we need to do. How do we take this business process that we have and lay it within the right kind of the set of tools that we could put together, because none of them are kind of perfect. It's always going to be, there are pros and cons to different approaches. um, and then how do we kind of maintain that over time and sort of grow within that environment? That's really what people want to do, but not everybody is looking to become a tech expert. If they were, they might have been working in the tech sector rather
Tech
than
expert.
into there's good money over there, I hear. So um, I think I think it's just important for people that don't think of themselves as having a technical capability or a technical, kind of, an ability to kind of take on, highly technical things, to see that there are areas where they don't have to be highly technical to have a lot of agency and a lot of power in, kind of controlling that risk that they face. So,
Yeah. And then having the connection with somebody that works in the nonprofit, sphere, so to speak.
mhm.
You call any old IT company, if they don't work with nonprofits all day in and out, they're not gonna be thinking with that mindset. They're
Yeah,
thinking with this is the solution to cover all your bases, not how can we cover your bases as best as possible
Right.
without using all of the grant that you have, or, taking all of your operating budget away for the next 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. But even, I mean, I think it's a great point. But even if you were able to say, okay, well, let's say a funder comes along to your organization and you don't, maybe you've got a, what we call an accidental techie, that person that ended up,
Talented.
it's usually, it's somebody who fixed the printer one time and then all of a sudden everybody calls them with their tech problems, but they're
Yeah,
not a technical person, right?
person's
They're
made.
that's usually the person that deals with TechSoup, right? That's the person that
Yeah.
gets tasked with the responsibility of, ordering the new laptops, or, getting
Mhm.
the upgrading the software, or looking for the new thing, whatever it is. So we deal with that person a lot. And, I think that I just think there's an over reliance on that person, and almost an outsourcing of that responsibility, whether it's an accidental techie or somebody with the role of an IT person who has more expertise. I do think that there is a tendency to just sort of think like, well, that's somebody else's job, and I'll leave that to them, and not see themselves as kind of part of it. But we really try to push people to see not just like, well, here are things that you should do for the workplace, but also see in their personal lives, like things like using a password manager, um, which is something that I started doing a few years ago. And prior to that, we've talked to people about password strategies and things like that, and you know, the things that most people do that we shouldn't do. And, you see people
Mhm.
get kind of very sheepish and don't want to admit that they use the same password over and over again, or it's their pet's name or a birth date, or,
Mhm.
but the fact of the matter is the vast majority of people do or have done these things at one point or another. And, it's only when you recognize, like, one, again, that is a highly risky activity. And just because it didn't cause you harm yesterday or the day before doesn't mean it won't today or tomorrow. But also, there's a pretty simple way. I mean, moving, sort of operating within a password manager is a shift in behavior, but it's pretty minimal.
Mhm.
And it's a thing that's available to anyone, right? And that's just one example of a kind of simple thing. Using multi-factor authentication is another one,
Right.
where people don't like it because there's friction, that extra step where you've got to, go get the code from your authenticator app or a text message or whatever it is. But again, when you think about the downside, I mean, I think that I saw there's a statistic that I have in my deck that I quote, and I might butcher it, but it's close to this. Um, there's a company called Qualsys they're like a security platform, and they did they might do this annually, but they survey the 20 most exploited vulnerabilities of a given year. And in this given year, I think this is maybe 2 years ago, 15 of those 20 were on Microsoft products, which is actually not surprising because Microsoft
Yeah.
is so ubiquitous. There's so many products, most everybody is using some of them, and a lot of people are there's a lot of opportunity. Of course, vulnerabilities are going to occur there. So that's not totally surprising. But the surprising thing is that the top two of those vulnerabilities, so these are the two things that hackers had the most success at getting into people's systems with in a given year, had patches available for like 7 years. And so what that means is that to me, it's the equivalent of, if you imagine if you like went out and you came back home 15 minutes later and saw that you'd left your door standing wide open, right? You'd be kind of
Mhm.
scared. You go in, make sure, you survey things and go, okay, everything's fine. Nobody walked in. I got away with one. But then you're going to close and lock the door, right? Imagine if you just left the door standing open for 7 more years because nothing bad happened that first time, right? It's kind of like that, and it's very often it's just because people don't want to take that extra minute to, like, I got to shut down my computer.
Yeah,
I'm
it's so.
crushing my email right now. I don't want to shut down for 5 minutes, and kind of, so you just put it on, you dismiss the message, and then eventually it goes away. I mean, anytime I'm on a call with somebody and I have a screen share and they've got a Chrome browser open, Chrome will have that little button in the corner
Yeah.
that says it's time to update. And if you don't do it for a couple of days, it turns yellow. And then if you don't do it for a few more days, it turns red. And if I'm ever on a call and I see a yellow or red, I'm always like, it's like seeing someone with food in their teeth. I have to like stop them and say, hey, please when we're done here, just take a moment, and like it'll take 2 seconds and you'll be you'll be safer. But again, people don't recognize how that makes them safer, right? It's easy to see why that doesn't feel like an action that is going to have any negative consequences if I don't take it. Um, but it's human nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually feel incredibly vindicated because of you saying that. I wish some more of my coworkers were here. These are the three that probably would listen to me the most. But
Well, you can put this podcast on repeat in the office and
yeah, I wish we had some intercom. But so you mentioned a lot of those little things. I was even going to ask about like those little kind of pain points, I guess, that
mm,
the average person doesn't think as important, but obviously is. Um, The thing I did want to ask, I know we kind of touched on the digital resiliency program, here and
mm,
there. Would you mind giving me like a run through? I know not everybody in the world is going to be able to break down the
yeah,
dollars and get one for every nonprofit, but I
sure.
think it's a great resource I'd like to be able to put out there for people.
Yeah, yeah, sure. It's so the digital resilience program was something that we launched in the height of COVID. So we received a very generous grant from the Truist Foundation. Shout out to the Truist Foundation to do a couple of things. So, if you remember back to, we were all, doing some sort of scrambling around in 2020 and into 2021, trying to figure out how to, navigate our worlds in this weird environment. And that included each of us individually in different ways, and it included every, you know, every organization and company was impacted in some significant way.
Mhm.
And that's Fortune 500 companies, and that's, tiny little nonprofits. So, organizations were figuring out how to deliver services in a remote environment if their service delivery was predicated on a face-to-face interaction, right? Like that wasn't possible in some places during certain times. How to collaborate if they were accustomed to being, in the office sitting next to the people that they needed to collaborate with. Suddenly, they're not doing that anymore. So, it really laid bare the vulnerabilities that, and it's funny because, well, it's not funny, but TechSoup for years before that has really been pushing the narrative of cloud migration. And that's a big factor in resilience. It doesn't kind of solve every problem, but it does solve a lot of the problems that would arise should you not be able to enter your office, whether it's because of a pandemic or there's a natural disaster or you kind of lose those physical devices. Cloud migration is a in general is a big part of that resilience. Um, so what the Truist Foundation was sort of charged us with, or wanted to see happen, was to one help a lot of organizations just get like the small tools they needed. So like Zoom licenses. So we did a whole bunch of like what we called micro grants. I think they were up to $2,000. So it was like get you like a new laptop so and so can work from home because there's only a desktop in the office and they can't move it. Get Zoom licenses so you can conduct meetings online, like the basics, right? Just
Yeah.
get the basics so we can keep going. And then on top of that, develop a program where we can really dive deep with not as many organizations, but starting small and hopefully growing from there, to help organizations be resilient for the next thing. Because the next thing could be another pandemic. It could be, like I said, natural disasters happen all the time. We're all vulnerable to kind of one or more, kind of typical disasters in our area. Um, it could be other things, political things, a lot of political things happening right now. Could be, it could be a public sentiment about the type of work that you do that changes the nature of your work. There's all kinds of things that can affect the predictable day-to-day nature of your work, and having a better approach to digital resilience can help to mute the negative consequences of those events somewhat. And so what we set out to do is identify mostly smaller organizations who lacked there's basically two big barriers to adopting technology for most nonprofits. It's not super surprising. It's funding, it's lack of funding, and it's lack of expertise to make the right decisions about what's the best what are the best tools that we should be using, and the expertise to configure and administer those tools going forward. And so we try to break down both of those barriers in the program. So all participants in the program go through a certain amount of training, mostly specifically around cybersecurity and a lot of these like kind of basic strategies that we're talking about. Um, and then we do an in-depth tech needs assessment with each of them to really dig into like what are they currently using, what strengths do they have both in technology, but maybe a lot of times their strengths might be they've got a senior leadership staff who's been there for a long time and they're really they've got a lot of information in their head. We might want to get a lot of that information that's in their head, onto
Yeah.
something more. But like that's a strength. That's an asset we can work with, right? Like that the information is there. Um, it might be that they have good relations internally and everybody works well together. Cool. That's good. That's something we can build on, right? That helps like if we're talking about enabling change within an organization,
Hmm.
because this is where a lot of organizations fall flat as well when it comes to adopting new technology. Sometimes they get the new tool and they implement it and people just don't really want to use it. They don't want to change because they're used to doing things a certain way. And so if you're not able to manage change through that process, then that can be a big barrier as well to the adoption part at least. Um, and so we try to identify where their highest priority opportunities are. And then depending on the amount of funding available, it's usually between five and sometimes up to $10,000, which is not an insignificant amount of money, but also it's not a full technology overhaul. You're not rebuilding you're not replacing 30 laptops with brand new shiny MacBooks. But
Yeah.
we can do a lot with that, right? We can get a lot. We can pick off the highest priorities, and take those on or get them started. And we also leave behind with them a kind of a roadmap. So here's kind of all the things that we see as your opportunities. We're going to pick off the highest priority of those and work on them with you, but this is your cheat sheet going forward, to help you kind of navigate the rest of, because digital transformation is not something that you just do and then you stop doing, right? Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, for those who are tech averse, it never really stops. Technology is going to change all the time. We're seeing these crazy changes with AI that are really very rapidly changing the way a lot of people do their work, and I think that will continue well into the over the next several years and even decades. um, but being able to, again, even if you're not the you don't have a tech consultant on staff who's able to sort of, or a CTO who's able to kind of navigate that for you. There's still it doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything or shouldn't take
Hmm.
any shouldn't take the initiative to kind of own your digital transformation. And so that's what we try to help people see that they have capacity to maybe not you know create the most sophisticated tech stack that like a large company would have, but they do have the ability to take certain actions and move and make progress. So we're not if we're not getting you to 100%, we might get you to 80, and then hopefully leave you in a place where you can sort of continue that going forward.
Great. Yeah. And there are some like sort of, I don't want to say outsourcing, but like resources. I think you kind of touched on it earlier, but for the company that is able to do that overhaul, whether big or small, and then they don't have any support going forward, they've got their guy Bob that knows Windows 7 and doesn't really know what
Yeah.
else to do with it after that. What is your recommendation for those companies going forward? They have this new overhaul, but don't have a lot of money to hire somebody to help them maintain it or take a company on to do so.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, because there's not, it's a good question without a great answer, I guess, but there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is if you have the means looking into a managed IT service. There are many who like don't really like working with small clients, especially nonprofits, or not
Mm.
especially, but you know, nonprofits often being amongst the group of small clients. But there are some who specialize in nonprofits. So Tech Impact is one that we work with very closely, that I would recommend. There's another organization called, or I'm not sure if they're a nonprofit or not, but they're called Community IT Innovators, and they're actually a great resource. They have a really great, if you're into podcasts, they have a really great podcast series that's mostly just recordings of webinars that they've done, but they have a lot of great actionable security advice. They're very security focused, so and they have a large base of clients, so they kind of get a lot of data just about what their subset of the nonprofit sector is experiencing. They do a really good annual report that they report out on a webinar in their podcast, that just kind of talks about the trends that they're seeing in the nonprofit sector. So kind of helps you keep up on what are the latest kind of threats that you should be kind of aware of. So if you have access to the funding that can support outsourcing some of that, that's certainly a great strategy. There are also, I would give a plug for Quad, TechSoup's membership program, which is, it's a paid membership program. The fee is $200 a year for the organization. So it's quite cost effective to have access to support. It's not the same as having an IT staff, but it does give organizations the ability to continue to progress along that digital transformation journey at a pace that they're able to maintain, without just sort of dropping it entirely because they feel like they don't have a good avenue for that support. So but yeah, I mean, the unfortunate fact is it's very hard to keep up with the evolution of technology, and hard means that it's scarce, and scarce means that it's expensive. So it costs a
Mhm.
lot of money to have people on staff that can really help navigate that in a way that we would all like. But that's just the reality that we live in. But it does, as much as going back to my car analogy, as much as I'm personally sort of allergic to like learning, I don't really want to learn about cars. um if somebody told me like, okay, well, there's no more mechanics, so you're going to have to do certain things yourself, I'd figure out a few things to try to keep it running. And I think that's kind of the way that I encourage people to, without going to get a degree in information technology, stretch themselves a little bit to understand the landscape of the types of tools that they need to be familiar with. It helps you be more effective with the tools that you have, and be more insightful with things that you might need in the future. So
Right. Yeah, totally agree with all of that, actually. Um, I think I think I kind of hit on everything that I wanted to hit on. So before I start to wrap it up, I just wanted to thank you so much for your time. I mean, I know I kind of bothered you all summer via email, but
no,
I'm really glad that we were able to do this.
yeah, happy to.
Yeah, I think tech is just kind of, I don't want to say conveniently ignored, but it's like one of those things that it costs money, so that's overwhelming for nonprofits. And like you mentioned, sometimes sticking your head in the sand can seem really easy until like your entire website's been taken over. With
Yeah, it can be very scary. So, and I understand why. It's, again, we don't. I mean, imagine you got plopped into maybe not even a different country. Imagine you like got dropped off on another planet, with another like species of aliens that didn't speak a language. You wouldn't have any sense of what should I be. You'd be afraid of everything, right?
Yeah,
And wouldn't really have the ability to approach anything in particular. Um, and I think with tech, for people that are not inclined towards kind of really understanding technology really deeply, and I count myself amongst these people. I've developed this sort of what expertise I have kind of through the experience of working with nonprofits that are struggling with this stuff. So I understand the hesitation to really become an expert in all of this stuff. Um, and I'm certainly far from what anyone would call a real expert, but I do think it's important to lean in, and embrace because once you start to embrace, you start to see that you have agency. You're not a helpless kind of, you're not just sort of at the whims of, what technology is kind of doing to you, but you can actually make it work for you, and your organization and your mission. So, hopefully that's something we can continue to help folks see.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a lot like a lot of the missions of a lot of nonprofits, empowering their clients, their
Exactly.
people they serve, like empower yourself. But
Yeah.
also, you never want to be that person that, click the ransomware email. You never want to be that person. It's more
You
inspiring
do.
to be afraid, I guess. But
Yeah, a little bit. But I will say, if you want one other piece of advice that I think is important to call in, um, creating a culture of kind of acceptance around this stuff, because what you don't want is for someone to click the ransomware link and then go, uh-oh, and like close it and not
don't
tell
tell me.
anybody and pretend it didn't happen and hopefully it just blows over. You want to create, you want to have an escalation path for that, but you want to create a culture where people don't feel ashamed. I mean, any one of us. There's a really good, I can't remember his name, but there's a guy on YouTube. If you just Google this, you'll probably find him. I think he's Scottish, who's made a tidy living out of hacking hackers. So he'll like
Mhm.
he'll do these YouTube videos where he like hacks into like a call center in India where they're like scamming people, and he hacks into their cameras and he says, "Oh, hello, your name's not Denise, it's like whatever, and you're wearing a blue blouse or whatever," and freaks them out, and it's very satisfying. I think this happened a couple of years ago. He himself uh, was convinced by a hacker to delete his own YouTube account, which was probably very lucrative, um, by somebody posing to be somebody from YouTube who said you have to update something or other. And so he was, what we call socially engineered, which is basically
Mhm.
just the psychological manipulation of people to take an action they wouldn't take. This guy who, if anybody should be able to resist being scammed like that, it's this guy. And applause to him for making a video admitting that he was hacked, because it just goes to show that it can really happen to anybody. So
Yeah.
creating a culture of acceptance that people will make mistakes, and the sooner we can clean up the mistakes, the better off we'll be, rather than sort of shaming people
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
falling for it, because any one of us could very easily click the link. So
Yeah, have a bad day before you have your coffee. That's all it
yeah,
takes.
exactly.
Well, we kind of got off track from our goodbye, but thank you again. Do you have any final notes for us before I let you get back to your life?
No, I don't think so. Just thanks a million for inviting us to participate. It's been great. It's been great speaking with you, and look forward to putting this in my podcast feed and following the future episodes.
Thanks for listening to CP Stated. We hope you'll subscribe, share, and join us for more conversations about the individuals, ideas, and innovations shaping services for people with disabilities in New York and beyond. Until next time, stay connected, stay committed, and stay CP Stated.